بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمنا به. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, a heavy congratulations to each and every one of you in the birth anniversary of the father of the Imam of our time, Imam al-Hujjah, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. When we examine the life of Imam Hasan Al-Askari, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, there's a lot of lessons that we can learn and derive from his behavior, from his ibadat, from his dialogues, from the way he used to live his life. And of course, if you examine his history, he was only 28 years of age before he was called to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his imamah, or the reign of his imamah, his tenure was of 6 years of imamah. And it's interesting because out of these 6 years, in the first couple of years, probably 1.5 years, he was in and out of prison. As in, he was called into one prison and then he was released, and then he was put back into prison, released again. And this happened in a number of times. But then for a lengthy period of his imamah, about 4.5, 5 years, you find that he was under house arrest. And when he was under house arrest, you realize that his position as an imam was not paralyzed. In the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say to him that now because you are confined to your home, therefore you cannot act as an imam of the nation. You found that the Imam alayhi salam, was faced with a number of different challenges, and yet he was able to counteract these numbers of challenges. And he did so in a remarkable way, to the extent that the books of history attest to the fact that he was able to counteract, he was able to refute many of the arguments that were presented to him, despite the fact that his hands were tied behind his back. When you examine his history, for example, they say that in his time, many different schools of thought began to surface. And the Imam alayhi salam, being the Imam, being the guardian of the message of Rasulullah, living in an era of misinformation, was able to safeguard the message of Rasulullah. According to historians, they say that, for example, in one area, the sect known as the Waqifiyya that existed in the time of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, resurfaced. And they had their own sets of beliefs. The Imam alayhi salam would then counteract or would argue against the Waqifiyya. You had the Ghulat, the extremists who would come, those who exaggerated the position and the maqam of the Ahl al-Bayt. They existed before the time of Imam Hasan al-Askari, but in the time of the 11th Imam, they somehow resurfaced. And according to some historians and thinkers, they say that the reason why these small sects within the religion of Islam began to resurface was because they saw that the Imam was in the state of house arrest. And they saw that the Imam, because his hands were tied behind his back, it was an opportunity for them to resurface and to share the information regarding their particular sects. So you found that the ghulat, the exaggerations or the exaggerators, they began to resurface. On the other hand, you found, for example, the mufawwidha, they began to resurface. Then you had the thanawiyya or the thanyawiyas, they began to resurface as well. Those who believed in two gods, the God of evil and the God of good, that whenever a person saw any evil taking place in this world, from death to, for example, illnesses to poverty, they did not believe that this was an outcome of an imbalance that was created in the world, that this was a product of the lack of good. Rather, they said that this is a product of a God who is in charge of evil. There is a God who is in charge of good, and there is a God who is in charge of evil. Just as how the beliefs of the Zoroastrians, they believed in a God of good and they believed in the God of evil. And so all of these different denominations began to resurface. And so the Imam alayhi salam would, of course, counteract their arguments. The Imam would challenge them in their arguments, even though he was placed under house arrest. You find, for example, in one particular incident, they say a philosopher, perhaps even an atheist, by the name of Al-Kindi, said this Al-Kindi, he was a scholar of his own right, and of course a philosopher, a philosopher. They say that he took on the challenge to disprove the remarkable nature, the miraculous nature of the Holy Quran. So Al-Kindi made an announcement, this was something known in the time amongst the people of Samarra, that he has taken on the challenge to refute the authenticity of the Quran. And what he did was he began to collate and gather all of the verses of the Holy Quran which contradicted with one another. Say there was a man, one of the students of Al-Kindi, he was assigned as a house servant of Imam Hasan al-Askari. So he would constantly be with Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam. And Imam Hasan al-Askari came to know that this particular house servant that was assigned to him by the government was one of the students of Al-Kindi. So he came towards him and he said that, have you thought of challenging your teacher Al-Kindi? Upon which the student turned around and he said, well, he's our teacher. His knowledge is far superior than our knowledge. How can we challenge him? It's not possible for us to challenge him. And the Imam said to him, what if I told you what to say to him? What if I gave you the arguments? Would you be in a position to produce or present these arguments to him? On which the student said, yes, that's not an issue at all. So the Imam said to him, go back to Al-Kindi and develop a relationship with him. Spend some time with him. Sit down with him. Try and understand where he's coming from with regards to his particular research. When you enter his inner circle, then one day in your discussions, tell him or present to him this particular argument. So the student did as the Imam told him to. He went towards Al-Kindi, he began to spend some time. After a while, Kindi realized that this student of his had much interest in gaining knowledge, and he became somehow part of his inner circle. One day, he had a discussion with his student, and his student said to him, he said to his teacher, he said, look, I understand where you're coming from with regards to this particular research, trying to refute the authenticity of the Holy Quran by finding all of the verses that contradict with one another. But there's a question in the back of my mind, it lingers in the back of my head. Perhaps you're able to absolve this shubha, this particular misunderstanding. He says, what's the question? He says, the question is it possible? Now listen to this argument of Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam. He says, is it possible that if the speaker of the Quran was to come towards you and speak with you, and recite to you the ayats of the verses, is it possible that the intended meaning behind his words is different to what is understood by the listener? As in, this is practically normal in every field, in every science. A philosopher such as Al-Kindi realizes this. He says, of course, this is natural. As a philosopher, when you pick up certain books on philosophy, you realize that many of the students of philosophy, they understand one thing, which is completely different and in contrast to what is spoken of by the author. When you pick up, for example, a book of medicine, what the author intends behind his words is different to what is understood by the reader. At times, many of these books are very complicated, and we need a teacher to try and allow us to understand what is intended by the author himself. So Al-Kindi replies, he says, this is practically normal, something that is existent in every field, in every science. So then the student tells his teacher, he says, then what conviction do you have in your heart? What confidence do you have in your heart that what you've read in the Quran, what you've understood by these verses are the intended meaning of the speaker of the Quran, by the author of the Holy Quran? Al-Kindi is taken aback by these words. He's shocked. He sits back and then he turns to his student. He says to him, where did you get this argument from? He says, this argument, it's been there in the back of my mind. It's been there always. He says, no, this is not your argument, nor is it the arguments of any of the students of this school. He says, because I know the students of this school, and none of them are of the caliber of presenting this type of an argument. It's such a simple argument, It's not for example, ilmi argument, an academical argument. It's very logical. Al-Kindi, he pushes his student. He says, who is the one who gave you this argument to present to me? Upon which the student confides, he says, it was Abu Muhammad Al-Askari, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Upon which Al-Kindi, he realizes, he says, it's true. I believe your words now, because an argument like this can only be proposed by a family like his, meaning that he comes from a scholarly family, and only scholars are able to formulate arguments like this. Then he orders one of his servants to create a fire, to ignite a fire, to spark a fire. He takes his research and he burns it there and then. So you found that Imam Al-Hasan Al-Askari, in one way or another, safeguards the message of Rasulullah by defending the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the rightful message of the Holy Quran, at whatever capacity, at his particular degree. Then you find, for example, there was a threat that was proposed by the Christians in the time of Imam Hasan Al-Askari alayhi salam. This particular incident is a very well-known incident that we all know of. They say that in Samarra there was a period of drought. The Imam was confined into the prisons. The Imam was imprisoned at that particular time as well. The Christians, what they did was they came into the Sahara. They came towards the deserts, the outskirts of Samarra. In the time of drought, all of the Christians came. The Muslims joined them. The monks, the priests, they also came. One monk in particular, he raised his hand towards Allah and he prayed for rain. When he prayed for rain, all of a sudden they saw. Be attentive to the fact that this man was a Christian himself. When he prayed, all of a sudden the clouds gathered above him. When the clouds gathered, it began to rain. The Muslims, when they saw this, when they saw that a Christian was praying to Jesus or to the Holy Spirit or to Allah, they saw that his du'as and his hajats were immediately answered. And so they began to inclinate themselves towards the Christian faith, towards Christianity. This happens to some of us in our day and age. Yes, in this day and age in particular. We look at our neighbors who are non-Muslims. We look at how successful they are in their businesses, the lavish cars they drive, yes, the lavish homes that they live in, and we question our faith because of it. As in, hold on a second, this person is a non-Muslim, yet he sees success in dunya. Why is it that I have not been given the same success, even though I believe in Allah and I believe in the message of the Holy Prophet of Islam? And at the same time, I believe in the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. I should be deserving of success compared to this person who has rejected the message of Islam. It's a very beautiful discussion. Why is it that Allah answers the prayers and the hajats of non-Muslims? It is because of the love and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Muslims began to have some sort of inclination towards Christianity. Al-Ma'mun, they say that the Caliph of the time, he saw this and he realized that this was a threat. So he came towards the Imam alayhi salam. And it's surprising to see that behind every threat, the Imam alayhi salam would be the solution. The Imam would always safeguard. And they realized that they would safeguard the message of Islam. So they came towards the Imam alayhi salam. The Imam was in the prisons. The Caliph explains the situation. The Imam, he says to him, he says, take me to this Christian monk. So they take the Imam towards the deserts, the outskirts of Samarra. And the Imam, when he stands before the monk, he tells the monk, he says, do what you did. The monk, he raises his hands and he begins to pray for rain. All of a sudden the clouds gather again. And the showers, they drop from the skies. It begins to rain. And then after a while it stops to rain. The Imam turns to one of his people that were there. And he tells them, he says, go to this monk. There's something in his hands. Take it away from him. Bring it to me. They came towards the monk, they took away a small pouch that was there in his hands, and they came towards the Imam and they gave it to the Imam. The Imam, holding the pouch in his hands, he turns to the monk and he says to him, he says, now pray. The priest or the monk, he raises his hands towards the skies, he prays, nothing happens. They don't see any formulation of clouds, they don't see any rain. The people were surprised. Said, hold on a second, many a times before this monk would pray, and it would rain, but now he's praying and there is no rain. Upon which the Imam alayhi salam explains to the people that within this pouch there is a bone of a prophet of Allah, and he used this bone to pray to God, and God would answer his dua, his hajats. He used this bone as a wasila to seek his hajats answered by Allah. Now that this bone is not in his hands, there is no wasila between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you found that the Imam would always be in the forefronts, protecting the message of Rasulullah from any threat that came towards him, from any different religion. You found that this was one of the ways in which the Imam alayhi salam acted, or this is one of the ways in which the Imam took hold of his responsibilities to safeguard the message of Rasulullah. From a second perspective, the Imam, one of the responsibilities was to answer the hajat of the people. And the people would come from far and wide. They would seek an audience with the Imam. Some who were successful, many of whom were rejected. They would come, they would sit with the Imam, they would present their needs, and the Imam would answer their needs. There were those who wanted children, and the Imam would pray for them. There were those who had Q&As with the Imam. They had fiqh questions, aqaidi questions. And the Imam would deliver answers to them. Then the third responsibility of the Imam was to prepare his nation, his followers, his Shia, to the coming of Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-sharif. In one particular letter, he sends a letter to the father of Sheikh al-Saduq. Sheikh al-Saduq, Ali ibn Muhammad al-Babaway al-Qummi. His father receives a letter from Imam Hasan Al-Askari. It's a lengthy letter, but towards the end of the letter, he writes to his companion. He says, referring to Al-Qummi, his very close companion, he says, understand that the time of intadhar will soon come, that you will have to interact with an Imam who is in ghaiba. And trust me when I say this, that in the time of ghaiba, afdalul a'malu ummati, that the best of a'mal, the best of actions of my nation in the time of Faraj is what? Intadhar al-Faraj, is waiting for the Faraj of Al-Qa'im of Ali Muhammad salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Someone may ask the question, why is Intadhar al-Faraj the best of a'mal in the time of ghaiba? The reason why it's the best of a'mal is because it culminates three things. Intidhar al-Faraj is a formula of three things. It culminates three particular elements. Number one, Intidhar al-Aqaidiyya. There is a theological perception when it comes to intidhar. Number two, intidhar al-suluki. And number three, intidhar al-a'lami. Let's go through one of these, or let's go through all three of these in the time that we have left. Intidhar al-aqaidiyya. When Imam Hasan Al-Askari says that the best of a'mal during ghaibah of my ummah is intidhar, actively waiting for the Imam alayhi salam, it incorporates a theological perception behind it as well, a theological element. And what the Imam alayhi salam is explaining here is that many a times you will find that many people of different generations go through a period of misinformation, a period of doubt, where people will question their faith. One of the best ways to enhance one's faith is by studying and gaining knowledge, especially when it comes to creedal issues, especially when it comes to the concept of imamah. That we should spend our time, we should invest our time and some of our monies trying to understand the delicate nature of imamah. Because wherever you turn, online, offline, you find people question the authority of imamah. How do we prove the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Through the Quran. How do we prove the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam? Through the riwayat that we have. Many of us, what do? We refer to ulama. Rightly so. But you find that living in the 21st century, even referring to some ulama, many of us are dissatisfied. Why? Because many of the ulama, or some of the ulama rather I should say, give out misinformation, unfortunately. They wear the garments of scholars, and under the name of academia, they present the variations of different opinions that exist amongst ulama of different centuries, without clarifying the position of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. You'll have one scholar, for example, he'll give you 20 different variations of opinions that existed from the time of Ghaibat al-Sughra until 2020. And in the end of his lecture, he will not, for example, clarify which opinions are correct and which opinions are false. And what this does is it begins to create more doubts within our hearts. It creates more misinformation within our hearts. We become what? We're shaky in our beliefs. So many a times it becomes necessary for us to read books, to turn to Allah and say, Ya Allah, there is doubt and confusion in my heart. I turn to you to remove this confusion from my heart. And then to sit down and to, for example, read some books, engage in questioning certain scholars, questioning areas which we do not understand. Spend some time and to have patience trying to clarify what's truth and what's not the truth. To try and clarify what's authentic and what's not authentic. To try and seek the truth with the purest of intentions. Especially in this day and age, there are those who come forward and they question the existence of the 12th Imam. They question the whole concept of ghaibah. They question how can an Imam live for over 1,000 years. They question the wiladah of Imam Sahib al-Asri wa zaman, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. They question the prophecies of the end of times. It becomes our responsibility to try and gain knowledge in these areas. Because the more a person delves deep into his aqeedah, a person who invests his time gaining knowledge about his creedal issues, about theology, the stronger he will become in his faith. حَتَّى لَا يَتَزَلْزَلْ, until he does not shake and waver from one position to another. That whenever a misconception is presented towards him, whenever a doubt comes towards him, he is able to answer these doubts very confidently and comfortably. You find that there is an ayah in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes and makes firm those who believe. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. How does Allah make firm the hearts of those who believe? بِقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ, through the word that is firm. When Imam Sadiq alayhi salam was asked the question, what is the meaning of qawl al-thabit? He replies, he says, al-qawl al-thabit is the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. What is the meaning of the verse here? According to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, He says that Allah will make firm those who believe in the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and this firmness will exist as long as they are alive. Fil hayat ad-dunya, as long as they are alive in dunya, as well as in akhirah. This person, his belief will strengthen him in his core. This is known as intidhar al-aqaidiyya, that we spend our time learning, gaining knowledge with regards to our theology, so that it strengthens our heart, specifically referring to the arguments of imama and how to prove imama. The second is intidhar as-suluki. Very important. It's not that I just believe in imama. I begin to follow the message of imama as well. I change my life according to the message, according to the teachings of the a'immat al-athhar. Al-intidhar, what's the meaning of intidhar? Intidhar is when I wait actively for the imam of my time. Not when I'm waiting for the bus, for example. When I'm waiting in the bus stop, I'm passively waiting. The bus will come, the train will come. I'll jump on the bus, I'll jump on the train. Actively waiting is when I'm about to meet a friend and I'm on the street and I'm waiting. I'm on a lookout. Where is he? Is he near? Is he far? I've seen him. Has he seen me? Let me grab his attention. This is the meaning of intidhar. One example that was given by the scholars is a beautiful example. It says, imagine a guest is about to come towards your home. You're about to receive a guest. How will you prepare for the coming of the guest? You'll make sure that your house is clean. You'll make sure that your house is tidy. You'll prepare a nice meal. You'll make sure that the guest room is ready. You'll make sure that every amenity is there, that your guest, such that your guest is comfortable, that your guest has no, for example, complaints, that your guest is not, for example, bothered, that by the time he leaves your home, he is not distant from you, rather he is close to you. You'll make sure that everything is available for him, such that he is absolutely comfortable. In the same way, I prepare for the coming of Al-Qa'im by cleansing myself from my own oppression. Because when I turn to the Quran tells me that whenever I commit a sin, I oppress my soul, I oppress my nafs. So I cleanse myself from within. How do I cleanse myself from within? So that I become a part of his movement, the movement of Al-Qa'im, of Al Muhammad. Number one, by adhering to the Sharia. I make sure that Salah is part and parcel of my life. I make sure, for example, Zakat is part and parcel of my life. I make sure that respect and being humble is part and parcel of my life. I make sure that dua is part and parcel of my life. Imam Baqir alayhi salam has a beautiful hadith with regards to the Shia. When he begins to identify the characteristics and the personalities of the Shia, he says, understand, usikum bi taqwallah. Number one, he says, I advise you to have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wal wara' fi dinikum, and to have wara' in your religion, in the way you live. It's not just adhering to the wajibat and refraining from that which is haram, but it also means to take on that which is mustahab and to refrain from that which is makruh. Al-wara is a state beyond taqwa, to push yourself. Wal-ijtihadi lillah, and to struggle in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The religion of Islam is a religion of struggle, spiritual struggle. You could have a lavish life, living in the most comfortable of ways. You could eat the most lavish of meals, but at least you should struggle spiritually, trying to gain proximity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is with regards to the relationship that I have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbil Alameen. But then I also have to adhere to the rights of those who are around me as well. The Imam continues, he says, وَصِدْقَ الْحَدِيثِ, that I should be truthful in my words when I engage with others. وَأَدَاءَ الْأَمَانَةِ, that I should be trustworthy, that people should confide in me and they should trust me in their affairs. That whenever they open up to me, whenever they tell me the most intimate areas of their lives, I should not go and share this with others. That I should be trustworthy when they confide their secrets with me. وَطُولِ السُّجُودِ, that I should what? Engage in my sajda, that I should engage in prostration. I should lengthen my prostration. Why? Because this brings about humility. Humility in Allah necessitates or brings about humility amongst others as well. You'll never find a person who is humble to others around him but is arrogant in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You will always find a person who is arrogant amongst people, those who are arrogant in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You find here the Imam alayhi salam says that a person who lengthens his sujood begins to establish humility in his heart. And then he goes on to say, وَحُسْنَ الْجَوَارِ, and be kind and be good towards your neighbors. Be kind towards your neighbors. فَهَذَا جَاءَ مُحَمَّدٌ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ وَسَلَّمَ, because this was the act and the actions adhered to by the Prophet of Islam. This behavior to be good towards others is not restricted only to the Muslims and the people of my community, but it ought to be to those who also do not share the theology that I share with. It should also be towards those who are non-Muslims as well, that whenever I engage with them in my business or in my day-to-day lives, I should show respect to them as well. They are deserving of respect. They have a right over me as well. In the same hadith, Imam Al-Baqir alayhi salam explains, he says, وَإِشْهَدُوا جَنَائِزَهُمْ, when there is a death in their communities, go and take part in their funerals. وَأُودُوا مَرْضَاهُمْ, and go visit them when they are sick. Referring to whom? The non-Muslims. Refer to them, visit them when they are sick. وَعُدُّوا حَقُوقَهُمْ, and make sure that their rights are adhered to. That if they are, for example, your employees, maintain their rights. Give them what they deserve. Not because the law tells me that I should pay them their wages. Because Islam tells me that I should pay their wages. وَأُدُّوا حُقُوقَهُمْ, and make sure that their rights are adhered to. They say one day Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was walking and they passed the church. He was with his companions. One of his companions, they turned to him and they said, look at this church. This is the place where Allah is disobeyed. This is the place where they perform shirk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Upon which the Imam alayhi salam, he says to him, Mah, he says, be silent. You do not know what you are talking about. These are Christians. These are people from Ahl al-Kitab. They have their own version of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have ihtaram towards them. Have respect towards them. Respect them and their beliefs and their different ways of worship. Do not abuse them because you do not know them. Have respect to them and have respect to this place of worship. Then he recites the verse. He says, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين وَلَمْ يُخْرِجُوكُمْ مِنْ دِيَارِكُمْ. He says, try and understand that when you live in a pluralistic society, there are those who do not share the same values as you. They do not believe in the same belief as you. That doesn't mean that you should fight against them. As long as they are not violent towards you, live with them peacefully. Live with them as if they are your own brothers and sisters, and show respect to them. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, when he comes and he explains the identity of a Shia in a pluralistic society, he says, كونوا لنا زينة ولا تكونوا علينا الشينة. Have akhlaq in such a way that when people see you, they see us. Be a beautification for us, and do not be those who do not give us a ugly reputation, that do not give us a bad reputation when they see you. Our akhlaq should be phenomenal, And then he goes on to say, وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا, and say nice things towards the people. Say nice thing towards the people. وَإِحْفَظُوا أَلْسِنَتَكُمْ, and guard your tongues when you speak with them. If you're the type of person who cannot say something nice, then say nothing at all. For saying nothing at times is better than saying something. You find, for example, many of us have just passed the era of Diwali, where our Hindu brothers and sisters, they celebrate this particular occasion. And soon we will enter Christmas as well, where our Christian brothers and sisters will celebrate the birth of Isa ibn Maryam. It behooves that we are nice towards them, that we should congratulate them in these auspicious events that they celebrate in their times. You find, for example, when, for example, some of us may have experienced this in our time, a couple of weeks ago, you'll find that our Hindu neighbors may have, for example, provided us with certain sweets. When they provide us with certain sweets, what do? We take it with respect. It doesn't mean that you should consume it. We should take it at least. But it behooves us to thank them and to wish them in these auspicious events. What it does not entail is for us to say to them, for example, that this is something that we cannot eat because you are mushrikeen, because you guys are, for example, najis from within, we cannot accept this gift. No, this is not far. This is far from the etiquettes of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. At least I should take it and I should thank them for it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I should consume it. I should take it from them at least and thank them. You find, for example, this is how the Ahl al-Bayt used to behave in their lives as well. So when it comes to intidhar as-suluki, believing in the Faraj, the dhuhur of Imam Qa'im, you find that it has an effect in my behavior as well, that I adopt good akhlaq, that I become his representative. When I believe in the Faraj or the dhuhur, when I believe in the Qa'im of Ali Muhammad, automatically I am a representative of him. That when people see me, they should understand that this is a representative of his Imam alayhi salam. And finally, you have what is known as intidhar al-alami, that I should speak about the Imam alayhi salam. Not necessarily on the mic or off the pulpit, but necessarily amongst my families. I should remind my children the importance of remembering the Imam of my time, to pray for him, to give sadaqah on his behalf, to recite dua, Allahumma ajjal li waliyika al-faraj, Imam az-zamanina, that I should teach my children these wonderful du'as, the dua of Faraj and the dua of al-intidhar and so on and so forth, that whenever they stand on the musalla, they should at least dedicate 2 raka'ah, the thawab of which should be gifted to the Imam of my time. That when I am, for example, in my work, I should share the knowledge of Imam al-Mahdi and the prophecies of Imam al-Mahdi to my Christian brothers and my Jewish brothers and sisters as well. That when I am in my community, I should share some of the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt that speak about Imam Qa'im alayhi salam, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. That I should engage, for example, sharing some of his advices, some of his maw'idah, spiritual advices, that I should share some of his, for example, letters that he's written to his wuzara, some of his representatives, that I should share some articles or some, for example, books that have been written about him, that I should share his information with the people in my community as well. That intidhar al-a'lami is when I share actively through my words and my actions the concept of al-Mahdi within Shia Islam as well. There are those who believe in him but forget about him, that I should take on that responsibility to revive his remembrance as well. That's why Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, and I end with this, Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam was asked, Yabna Rasulullah, what is the meaning of wal asr? upon which he says Al-Asr refers to the time when the zuhur of Al-Qa'im of Al Muhammad takes place. And then he says, Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Indeed, when the zuhur of the 12th takes place, and when it takes place, every single human being will be in the state of loss, absolute loss, except those who have waited for him. They have waited for him in a very meticulous way. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except those who believe in his wilayah and are able to prove his authority using the Quran and using the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and they do good. They do good towards Allah or for Allah, and they do good towards the people around them. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, and they remind others of the truth. They remind others of Al-Qa'im, of Al Muhammad. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, and they have patience waiting for him. These are the successful ones in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this auspicious event of the birth of the 11th Imam of Al Muhammad, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers our hajats, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives our sins and keeps us protected from the pandemic, and for those who have been afflicted by the pandemic to be, of course, relieved, and to be, of course, given their health back to them, inshallah. Wa akhir ad-da'wan alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Surah al-Mubarakat al-Fatiha.